Why would you get on live just to do that?
Woohoo.
No, you're not even on there. Get it off. You over here acting like you sleep. That's why you can't even do it. Haha, that's why it's not working. Get me the fuck over there. You got my forehead on me. Stop, stupid.
In the early hours of September 4th, 2023, something happened in Federalsburg, Maryland that would forever change how this small community viewed the quiet apartment complex on Gardens Court. At exactly 12:47 a.m., emergency dispatch received a frantic call from a neighbor who had been jolted awake by sounds no one should ever have to hear. Raised voices cutting through the Labor Day night, followed by the unmistakable crack of gunshots. When police arrived at the modest apartment building, they discovered a scene that would haunt even the most experienced investigators. There, in the grass outside the building where families slept peacefully just hours before, lay 27-year-old Caryne Faye Brown. Shell casings glinted under the streetlights, scattered around her lifeless body like deadly confetti, marking the end of a life that had only just begun to bloom. But here's what makes this case so devastating. Karine wasn't just in the wrong place at the wrong time. She wasn't a random victim of street violence or a robbery gone wrong. This young mother of 4 had been deliberately hunted down at the very place she thought would finally offer her safety. The apartment on Gardens Court was supposed to be her sanctuary, her fresh beginning, her escape from years of terror. What the investigators found that night told a story that would make your blood run cold. Multiple gunshot wounds to both her head and chest. This wasn't a crime of passion or a moment of lost control. Someone had come to that apartment complex with one intention: to make absolutely certain that Caryne Faye Brown would never leave again. The most heartbreaking part? Karine had done everything right. She had found the courage to leave an abusive relationship. She had secured her own place. She was working, building independence, creating a safe space for her children. She had broken free from the cycle that trapped so many women in dangerous situations. She thought the hardest part was behind her. She was wrong. What Karine didn't know, what so many women escaping abuse don't realize, is that the moment you walk away is often the moment you're in the greatest danger. Statistics show that a woman is 75 times more likely to be killed when she leaves her abuser than when she stays. But why? What drives someone to choose murder over letting go? The man who killed Karine that night wasn't a stranger lurking in the shadows. He wasn't some random predator who happened upon a vulnerable victim. He was Quandre Lee Winder, the father of her children, the man who was supposed to protect her, the person who knew exactly where to find her when she thought she was finally safe. But what possessed Winder to track down the mother of his children in the dead of night? What happened in those final moments before he pulled the trigger? Not once, but multiple times. And perhaps most importantly, how did a woman who had shown such incredible strength in leaving an abusive relationship end up murdered in the very place she believed would give her a new start? The answers to these questions reveal a truth about domestic violence that society often refuses to acknowledge. Sometimes the punishment for seeking freedom is death. 4 children went to sleep that Labor Day night with their mother alive. They woke up orphans. Tonight, we're going to examine every detail of this tragic case, from the courage it took Karine to leave, to the investigation that brought her killer to justice, to the questions that still haunt everyone who knew her story. Because Caryne Faye Brown was more than just a victim. She was a daughter, a mother, a friend, and a fighter who deserved so much more than the violence that ended her life. Before we continue with Karine's story, I want to hear from you. Have you ever wondered why some people become more dangerous when they lose control over someone they claim to love? What do you think drives someone to choose violence over acceptance? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if you believe every person deserves to feel safe in their own home, please hit that like button to help us spread awareness about these critical issues. To understand the magnitude of what was lost that September night, you need to know who Caryne Faye Brown truly was, not as a victim, but as a vibrant human being whose life touched everyone around her. Born on March 22, 1996, in Norman, Oklahoma, Karine possessed the kind of personality that naturally drew people toward her. Friends and family consistently described her using the same words: warm, genuine, infectious. Her smile wasn't just something people noticed. It was something they remembered long after she left the room. Co-workers would later say that her laughter had a way of filling spaces, turning ordinary moments into something brighter. But perhaps nowhere did Caryne's true character shine more than in her role as a mother to her 4 young children. Motherhood wasn't just something Caryne did. It was who she was at her core. Every decision she made, every goal she set, every dream she nurtured, revolved around giving her children the best possible life. She had this remarkable ability to find joy in the smallest moments with them. Whether it was reading bedtime stories, helping with homework, or simply watching them play. Those who knew her best often marveled at how she balanced everything. Single motherhood is demanding under the best circumstances, yet Caryne managed to make it look almost effortless. She had this gift for being fully present with her children, even when she was exhausted from work or overwhelmed by life's demands. Her kids knew they were her priority, not because she told them, but because she showed them every single day. At work, Caryne was the employee every manager hopes to find. She worked at a local establishment where her friendly demeanor and reliability made her a favorite among both colleagues and customers. Supervisors noted her consistency and positive attitude, even during challenging shifts. She approached her job with the same dedication she brought to motherhood, understanding that her work wasn't just about earning a paycheck, but about building stability for her family. Her co-workers remember someone who could lighten the mood during stressful times, who remembered details about their lives and always asked how they were doing. During breaks, she would share stories about her children with obvious pride, her face lighting up as she talked about their accomplishments, their personalities, their dreams for the future. The relationships Caryne built extended far beyond her immediate family. She maintained close bonds with her parents, siblings, and extended relatives, who all recognized something special in her spirit. Family gatherings were brighter when Caryne was there. She had this natural ability to bring people together, to make everyone feel included and valued. These weren't superficial connections either. Caryne invested deeply in the people she cared about. She was the kind of person who remembered important dates, who checked in when someone was going through a difficult time, who celebrated others' successes as enthusiastically as her own. Her network included what she lovingly called her bonus parents, close family friends who had become like family over the years. What made Caryne truly remarkable was her optimism paired with practicality. She wasn't naive about life's challenges, but she refused to let hardships define her outlook. Friends often recalled evenings spent together where Caryne would share her dreams and aspirations with infectious enthusiasm. She talked about stability, not just financial, but emotional stability for her children. She wanted them to grow up in an environment filled with love, support, and endless possibilities. Her dreams weren't grandiose or unrealistic. Caryne wanted simple things: a home where her children felt completely secure, the ability to provide for their needs without constantly worrying about money, and most importantly, a community where her family could thrive. She spoke about wanting to be the kind of mother her children would be proud of, someone they could look up to and learn from. Even during difficult periods in her life, those closest to Caryne noticed her remarkable resilience. She had this ability to find small moments of happiness in everyday routines. A funny thing one of her children said, a particularly good day at work, or just the simple pleasure of a quiet evening at home with her family. Her sense of humor was another defining characteristic. Caryne could find levity in situations that might overwhelm others, and her gentle teasing and quick wit made her the kind of person others genuinely enjoyed being around. She wasn't just someone you liked, she was someone you looked forward to seeing. This was Caryne Faye Brown, a devoted mother, a reliable friend, a hard worker, and a woman whose presence made the world a little brighter for everyone who knew her. Her life was defined not by the tragedy that ended it, but by the love, laughter, and hope she brought to every day she lived. Labor Day weekend 2023. For most residents of Federalsburg, Maryland, it was a time for rest, family gatherings, and the final celebrations of summer. The 700 block of Gardens Court was typically quiet during evening hours, with most families settling in for the night after a long holiday weekend. Karine had spent the day as she usually did, focused on her children, managing household tasks, and preparing for the work week ahead. Neighbors who saw her that day described her as appearing normal, going about her regular routines. There was nothing to suggest that by midnight, the peaceful atmosphere of the apartment complex would be shattered forever. What happened next unfolded with terrifying speed. At approximately 12:30 a.m., Quanderly Winder arrived at Caryne's apartment building. How he knew her exact location, why he chose that specific time, and what triggered his decision to come there that night are questions that investigators would later piece together. What is certain is that his arrival marked the beginning of a confrontation that would escalate beyond anything the quiet neighborhood had ever witnessed. Residents living in nearby units first became aware something was wrong when they heard voices outside, not the casual conversation of neighbors, but the strained, elevated tones of people in conflict. A woman living 2 units down from Karine later told police she was awakened by what sounded like an argument taking place directly outside her bedroom window. The verbal altercation continued for several minutes, with witnesses describing voices that grew progressively louder and more agitated. A resident on the second floor reported hearing a male voice making demands, though the specific words were difficult to make out through his closed windows. What was clear to anyone listening was that this wasn't a casual late-night conversation. This was a confrontation. Then came the gunshots. Multiple residents described hearing what they initially thought might be fireworks. 3 distinct pops in rapid succession, followed by an eerie silence that seemed to blanket the entire complex. It took several seconds for the reality to sink in. Those weren't fireworks. The neighbor closest to the incident was the first to act, immediately calling 911 while peering cautiously through her window blinds. What she saw would haunt her for months afterward. A figure fleeing the scene on foot, moving quickly through the parking area toward the street. She provided this crucial information to the emergency dispatcher while staying on the line until first responders arrived. The responding officers reached Gardens Court within 4 minutes of the initial call. What they discovered was a crime scene that immediately indicated this was no random act of violence. Karine's body was located in the grass area between 2 apartment buildings, approximately 30 feet from the main entrance to her unit. The positioning told a story. She hadn't been shot inside her apartment and dragged outside. She hadn't been caught off guard while entering or leaving her car. The evidence suggested she had come outside, either voluntarily or under duress, and the shooting had occurred in that open area where multiple neighbors could potentially witness it. The first investigator on scene immediately recognized several critical elements. The shell casings were scattered in a pattern consistent with the shooter having fired while standing relatively close to the victim. The angles of impact indicated the shots had been fired deliberately, with intent to kill rather than wound or intimidate. One officer began canvassing the immediate area, while her partner secured the perimeter. Within minutes, they had identified 3 witnesses who had heard the altercation and 2 who had actually seen portions of what transpired. This early witness testimony proved crucial in establishing both the timeline and the basic sequence of events. The forensics team arrived at 1:23 a.m. and immediately began documenting everything. The crime scene photographer captured images from multiple angles, ensuring that every piece of physical evidence would be preserved. The shell casings were collected using proper chain of custody procedures, with each piece photographed in place before being bagged and labeled. Investigators noted several elements that indicated premeditation rather than spontaneous violence. The location of the shooting suggested the perpetrator had specifically chosen this spot, away from direct lighting but still within the complex grounds. The multiple shots fired indicated a determination to ensure the victim wouldn't survive. By 2:15 a.m., The preliminary scene investigation was complete. Karine's body was transported to the medical examiner's office, where an autopsy would later confirm the cause of death and provide additional forensic evidence. The apartment complex, meanwhile, remained cordoned off as investigators continued processing evidence that might help identify the shooter. What emerged from those first few hours of investigation was a clear picture of targeted violence. This wasn't a robbery. Caryne's purse and phone were found undisturbed near her body. This wasn't random. The shooter had known exactly where to find her. This wasn't accidental. The multiple gunshot wounds indicated a deliberate intent to kill. The residents of Gardens Court spent the remainder of that night in shock, many unable to return to sleep, knowing that such violence had occurred just outside their windows. For a community that prided itself on being safe and family-friendly, the events of September 4th represented a fundamental shift in how secure they felt in their own homes. By dawn, news of the shooting had spread throughout Federalsburg. Local media began reporting on the incident, though details remained limited as investigators worked to piece together exactly what had transpired and who was responsible. This case shows us how quickly domestic disputes can escalate into deadly violence, often in places where victims believe they should feel safest. If you or someone you know recognizes the danger signs in a relationship, please know that help is available through the National Domestic Violence Hotline. Drop a heart in the comments if you believe everyone deserves to feel safe in their own home. And don't forget to subscribe for more coverage of cases that highlight these important social issues. To understand what led to that fatal September night, we need to examine the toxic relationship that bound Caryne Faye Brown and Quandre Lee Wender together for years. A relationship that would ultimately cost Caryne her life. Karine and Wender's relationship began like many others, with promises and hope for a shared future. They became parents together, bringing 4 children into the world. Children who should have been the foundation of a loving family unit. Instead, those children became both Caryne's greatest source of strength and the chains that kept her bound to an increasingly dangerous situation. The abuse didn't start immediately. It rarely does. Domestic violence typically follows a predictable pattern, a cycle that begins with small controlling behaviors that gradually escalate over time. For Caryne, the early signs were likely subtle. Wender questioning where she went, who she talked to, or how she spent her time. These seemingly minor intrusions probably felt like caring or protectiveness at first, but the control grew stronger. Phone calls became interrogations, social outings required explanations, friendships faced scrutiny. What started as questions became demands, and demands became threats. The emotional abuse created an environment where Karine began second-guessing herself, walking on eggshells, and making decisions based on avoiding Wender's anger rather than what was best for her and her children. Law enforcement records show that police had been called to respond to domestic disturbances involving the couple on multiple occasions prior to the murder. These documented incidents reveal a pattern of escalating violence that authorities recognized as increasingly dangerous. Each police report told a similar story: arguments that turned physical, threats that became more specific, and a woman who was clearly afraid for her safety. During one documented incident, Wender had threatened to kill Karine if she ever tried to leave him, a threat that law enforcement took seriously enough to file formal charges. But like many victims of domestic abuse, Karine found herself trapped between the fear of staying and the terror of leaving. The system designed to protect her could only do so much when she was afraid to fully cooperate with prosecution efforts. The psychological impact of years of abuse had taken its toll. Karine experienced what experts call trauma bonding, a survival mechanism where victims develop emotional attachments to their abusers as a way of coping with the constant threat of violence. This doesn't mean she loved the abuse. It means her mind had adapted to an impossible situation by trying to find ways to survive within it. Financial dependency further complicated her situation. As a single mother of 4, leaving meant finding a way to support her children entirely on her own. Wender had systematically undermined her independence over the years, making it difficult for her to maintain steady employment or build the resources necessary to establish a separate household. But despite these overwhelming obstacles, Karine found the courage to break free. The decision to leave an abusive relationship is never simple or straightforward. For Karine, it required months of planning, saving money secretly, and finding safe housing away from Winder's influence. She had to coordinate childcare, maintain her job, and navigate the complex process of establishing legal independence, all while hiding her intentions from someone who had repeatedly threatened to kill her if she left. The weeks leading up to her death represented what should have been the beginning of her new life. She had successfully moved out, established her own residence, and was building the independent life she had dreamed of for years. Her children were adjusting to their new environment, and for the first time in years, Karine was making decisions based on what was best for her family, rather than what would avoid triggering Winder's rage. What Karine couldn't have known, what many people don't realize, is that leaving an abusive partner is statistically the most dangerous time for victims of domestic violence. Research consistently shows that the period immediately following separation is when abusers are most likely to escalate to lethal violence. The loss of control that comes with their victim's departure often triggers an explosive response. Experts in domestic violence prevention call this the lethality period, a window of time when the abuser realizes they can no longer control their victim through psychological manipulation or physical intimidation. For some abusers, murder becomes the ultimate act of control. If they can't possess their victim, they'll ensure no one else can either. Winder's actions on September 4th were the culmination of this deadly psychology. He had tracked Karine to her new home, confronted her in the dead of night, and when she refused to return to the relationship that had terrorized her for years, he made good on his previous threats. The tragedy of Karyne's story isn't just that she died, it's that she died at the moment when she had finally found the strength to choose freedom over fear. Within hours of discovering Karyne's body, investigators had a clear suspect in mind. Quandary Lee Winder's name surfaced almost immediately, not through guesswork, but through solid police work and witness identification. The first major breakthrough came from the neighbor who had witnessed the shooter fleeing the scene. Her description of the figure running from the apartment complex, combined with her account of the male voice she'd heard during the altercation, provided investigators with crucial details about the perpetrator's height, build, and general appearance. When detectives showed her a photo lineup, she didn't hesitate in identifying Winder as the man she'd seen that night. Forensic evidence began painting an even clearer picture. The shell casings recovered from the scene were immediately sent for ballistic analysis. When investigators searched databases for registered firearms, they discovered that Winder legally owned a handgun matching the caliber of bullets that had killed Karine. This discovery transformed him from a person of interest into the primary suspect. But Winder was nowhere to be found. The manhunt began at dawn on September 5th, less than 8 hours after the shooting. Detectives first went to Winder's last known address, only to find the residence empty. Neighbors reported they hadn't seen him since the previous afternoon. His vehicle was also missing, suggesting he had fled immediately after the shooting. Maryland State Police issued a statewide alert, distributing Winder's photograph and vehicle description to law enforcement agencies across the region. The urgency was clear. They were dealing with an armed individual who had already proven capable of murder, and every hour he remained free increased the potential danger to the public. The investigation team worked around the clock, following every possible lead. They contacted Winder's known associates, family members, and former employers. Most claimed they hadn't seen him recently, though investigators suspected some were being less than truthful about their knowledge of his whereabouts. Digital forensics provided the next crucial lead. Cell phone tower data placed Winder's phone in the vicinity of Gardens Court at the time of the shooting, then tracked its movement south toward Delaware in the hours immediately following the murder. This electronic trail gave investigators a clear direction for their search efforts. 26 hours after the shooting, the break they needed finally came. Delaware State Police spotted Winder's vehicle at a gas station in Seaford, approximately 60 miles from the crime scene. The arrest was swift and without incident. Winder offered no resistance when officers approached him, though he immediately requested an attorney and refused to answer any questions about the shooting. The coordination between Maryland and Delaware law enforcement agencies was seamless. Within hours, Winder was transported back to Maryland, where he was formally charged with first-degree murder, second-degree murder, and multiple firearms violations. The speed of his capture was attributed to the clear evidence trail he had left behind and the effective communication between multiple police departments. Building the prosecution's case required meticulous attention to detail. Ballistic experts confirmed that the bullets recovered from Karyne's body had been fired from Winder's registered handgun. The weapon itself was found during a search of his vehicle, still containing ammunition matching the shell casings from the crime scene. The prosecution team, led by the state's attorney's office, methodically assembled their evidence. They had eyewitness testimony placing Winder at the scene. They had forensic evidence linking his weapon to the murder. They had digital evidence tracking his movements before and after the crime. Most importantly, they had a clear motive established through the documented history of domestic violence between the couple. Pre-trial proceedings moved relatively quickly. Winder's defense team attempted to negotiate a plea agreement, but prosecutors were determined to pursue the most serious charges possible. The strength of the evidence made their position clear. This was a case they were confident of winning at trial. In July 2024, nearly 10 months after Karyne's murder, Winder accepted a plea agreement rather than face a jury trial. He pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and the use of a firearm in the commission of a violent crime. The plea hearing was brief, with Winder offering no explanation for his actions and showing no visible emotion as the charges were read. The sentencing hearing brought Karyne's family face to face with her killer for the first time since the murder. Family members were given the opportunity to deliver victim impact statements, describing the devastating effect Karyne's death had on her children, parents, and extended family. Through tears and anger, they spoke of a life cut short and children who would grow up without their mother. Judge Harrison imposed the maximum sentence allowed under Maryland law. Winder was sentenced to life in prison for the murder charge, with all but 50 years suspended. The firearm charge carried an additional 20 years to be served consecutively. Under the terms of his sentence, Winder will not be eligible for parole consideration until he has served a minimum of 50 years behind bars. The legal proceedings concluded with Winder being led away in shackles, his life of freedom ending in the same courthouse where Karyne's family sought justice for her death. For the investigators who had worked tirelessly to build the case, the conviction represented successful completion of their duty to ensure that her killer faced consequences for his actions. The swift resolution of the case, from crime to conviction in less than 11 months, demonstrated how effective police work and prosecutorial determination can deliver justice even in the most tragic circumstances. In the months following Winder's conviction, something remarkable began happening in Federalsburg and the surrounding communities. Karyne's death had awakened people to a harsh reality that many had preferred to ignore. Domestic violence wasn't something that happened to other people in other places. It was happening right here, behind closed doors, to neighbors and co-workers and friends. Local advocacy groups reported a significant increase in calls to their helplines. Women who had been suffering in silence suddenly found the courage to reach out for help. Karyne's story had shown them both the deadly consequences of staying trapped and the importance of having a safety plan when deciding to leave. Community leaders organized educational workshops focused on recognizing the early signs of relationship abuse. These weren't abstract discussions about statistics. They were practical sessions teaching people how to help friends or family members who might be in danger. Participants learned about creating safety plans, understanding the escalation patterns of abusive relationships, and connecting victims with professional resources. The tragedy also prompted changes in how local law enforcement responds to domestic violence calls. Police departments implemented enhanced training programs emphasizing the heightened danger period when victims attempt to leave their abusers. Officers now receive specific instruction on conducting thorough risk assessments and connecting victims with immediate safety resources. Healthcare providers in the area began incorporating domestic violence screening into routine medical appointments. Emergency rooms posted information about abuse resources in multiple languages, recognizing that victims often seek medical care for injuries without initially disclosing their true cause. Schools developed age-appropriate programs teaching young people about healthy relationship dynamics. Educators understood that prevention must start early, before patterns of control and manipulation become normalized in romantic relationships. Perhaps most importantly, funding was secured for transitional housing specifically designed for domestic violence survivors. These safe spaces provide women and children with secure temporary housing while they establish independence, addressing one of the most significant barriers that keeps victims trapped in dangerous situations. If you or someone you care about is experiencing domestic violence, please know that help is available right now. The National Domestic Violence Hotline operates 24 hours a day at 1-800-799-7233. Trained advocates can help create safety plans, provide local resource information, and offer support without judgment. For those ready to leave an abusive relationship, remember that planning is crucial. Document injuries and threats. Keep important documents in a safe location outside your home. Identify trusted friends or family who can provide emergency shelter. Save money gradually in an account your abuser cannot access. Most importantly, trust your instincts. If you feel you're in immediate danger, don't hesitate to call 911. Caryne Faye Brown's life mattered. Her death was not meaningless. Every person who seeks help because of her story, every policy change implemented in her memory, every life saved through increased awareness represents her continuing impact on this world. Her 4 children will grow up knowing their mother was brave enough to fight for their safety, even though that fight ultimately cost her life. They will also grow up in a community that learned from her tragedy and committed to protecting other families from experiencing similar loss. Change happens when communities refuse to accept that domestic violence is inevitable. Caryne's legacy challenges all of us to speak up, reach out, and create a world where no one has to choose between staying alive and staying trapped. If this story has opened your eyes to the realities of domestic violence, please share it with someone who needs to hear this message. Like this video, subscribe to True Crime Case Tapes, and ring that notification bell so you never miss our coverage of cases that demand our attention. Together, we can honor victims like Karine by refusing to let their stories be forgotten and by working to prevent these tragedies from happening again.